When you're learning English, you might get frustrated to find yourself not being able to speak English as much and thoroughly as you understand Netflix without subtitles and books without dictionaries. So in this video, I'm going to break down why you can't speak English fluently as much as you can understand English. More specifically, I'm going to delve into the concept of passive fluency and try to address why such a thing arises. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about my own strategies to overcome it based on my own learning goals. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jun and I'm a master's student studying microbiology and liberal arts. So these days I'm reading a lot of Western classics in English. I have been learning English seriously for a while, and I have definitely gotten frustrated by the fact that I couldn't really speak fluently as much as I could understand English. Without further ado, let's jump in and talk about passive fluency. So passive fluency refers to a level of language proficiency where an individual can understand and comprehend the language quite well while listening and reading, but they struggle when it comes to speaking or actively using the language in a conversation. In other words, they have a strong receptive language ability, i.e. listening and reading because you're receiving the language technically in the forms of auditory and visual. Also, they have a limited productive language skills where they have to actually produce the language in the forms of speaking and writing. So one thing to stress before I go further is that I'm not saying that this is a negative thing whatsoever. Everybody has a different learning goal. For example, your learning goal for studying English might be consuming and understanding the foreign movies and series without subtitle or reading books without dictionaries or something like that. In this case, you might not have to work on speaking and writing skills. Also, if you want to do a literature research in a foreign language, for example, like looking up the scientific papers in English, you don't have to reach the fluency in speaking and writing because all you have to do here is comprehending the text, i.e. reading comprehension. So what I'm trying to say is that passive fluency is never a negative thing, but as long as you reach a certain level in certain language skill, for example, reading or listening, to be able to achieve your learning goal, that is just sufficient. That is a very good thing. But if you want to become fully fluent and communicative in a foreign language, you might need some active fluency. And that was actually my learning goal in English and Japanese, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But let's just talk about why passive fluency and the gap between receptive and productive language skills arise. I believe that these can be attributed to the current issues in our education system in terms of teaching English as a second language, i.e. ESL. The first issue is the test-centric learning. So there's a huge emphasis on standardized tests, which can lead to a narrow focus on test prep rather than the holistic language development, i.e. working on reading skill, listening, writing, speaking, vocab, and grammar. In such an environment, students can feel pressure to do well on the exam, i.e. it becomes their learning goal just to do well on the exam. So this can hinder their overall language growth in different language skills, as well as their motivation and joy to learn the language. Secondly, grammar overload. I kind of talked about this in one of my previous videos. Grammar is important. Grammar is very important, especially if you are aspiring to become a researcher or if you're pursuing an academic career in a foreign language. But I don't think we should overly focus on grammar rules in language learning. Especially for beginners, it could be intimidating, all the tables like noun declensions and then verb conjugations, all that kind of stuff. They could intimidate the beginners or even intermediate speakers, which could lead to an aversion to speaking a language. Instead of worrying about how to express themselves in a foreign language, students might be overly concerned about whether or not they're grammatically correct. I think this grammar overload could definitely cause a fear of speaking the language because they might be worried about being judged, being laughed at. This brings us to the third issue, which is the lack of real-life application. Classroom instruction with the emphasis of grammar rule and tests doesn't always align with practical and everyday language use. This makes it difficult for students to navigate real-world conversations. And the final issue that I want to talk about is the limited practice. In the classroom setting, students may be overly focused on reading and listening comprehension instead of speaking and writing, which is actually producing something in the language. If they haven't had many opportunities to practice speaking and writing, this could definitely lead to a gap between receptive and productive language skills. By the way, if you're thinking you're getting some value out of this video, I would love it if you could hit the like button. Thank you so much. Lastly, let's talk about my own strategies to overcome the passive fluency. I think this was basically what my concern was back when I was in high school, towards the end of my high school, and even in the freshman year of college. I think there was a huge gap between my productive and receptive language abilities, i.e., I was quite okay with English grammar, reading and listening, maybe writing as well, because I could take my time to think about what to say in writing. But speaking was different. Speaking is very spontaneous, and then in the conversations, I have to think about what to say correctly in a matter of milliseconds. So speaking was well below compared to my other language skills. So I decided to actively work on this to fill the gap between my language skills. So the very first thing I did is to set clear goals, or at least think about or reflect my own goals for learning English. I think since I was like 20 or 19 years old, I've always wanted to transform my life or myself. And I decided to leverage foreign languages to do that, where I try to change my brain chemistry by internalizing the foreign languages as well as all the context behind them. I thought this was a very good way to diversify my identity. That was basically my goal for learning English, which is to build my life around it. So I embarked on a sincere journey of language immersion to build my life as well as my career around it. So the things that I did to achieve this learning goal before studying abroad, firstly, sign up for a conversation class in my home country. In the conversation class, there was a teacher who was a native speaker and then maybe 10 other students around the table. I was quite terrified with speaking first, but I just kept trying to put myself in that conversation, i.e. I just continued to put myself out of the comfort zone. So I just ended up getting used to that uncomfortable situation and finally started speaking in a foreign language with other people and in front of the native speaker as well. And the second thing that I did is regular practice. Consistency is a superpower for everything, including language learning. So I read aloud in English to work on my accent and pronunciation, and I also wrote a journal in English where I could take my time to express myself on a piece of paper. Also, I try to watch as many series and movies in English as possible without subtitle or at least with English subtitle. So basically, I was trying my best to live the language in my home country. These ended up helping me a lot with expressing myself better in a conversation class. So this created some sort of positive feedback loop where the conversation class made me want to practice more in my own time because I wanted to express myself more in the conversation class. There were other people there, including the teachers and my fellow students, and I wanted to test myself how much I could express myself and how fluently I could say something in a foreign language. Also, there was the joy of being able to generate more sentences in my own words to express myself during my practice session. Always made me want to test myself further in the conversation class. So that was the feedback loop that I got, I think. In other words, this regular practice really harmonized well with the conversation class. And the last thing I did to achieve my learning goal in English is language and cultural immersion. So all my practice I mentioned above really made my life easier abroad. Of course, there was some awkwardness in the beginning, but I couldn't believe that I could have this deep conversation with the native speakers in a foreign language. But as always, I always thought that there was much more room for me to grow. So I started a language exchange where I helped my partner with her Korean or Japanese, because at that time I was more fluent in Japanese than in English. Since I was abroad, it was a lot easier for me to find a native speaker who was willing to do a language exchange. So we met once a week for an hour or two. And in my daily life, I try to collect as many questions as possible, basically questions on everything that I wanted to express in English. And I asked my partner during our language exchange session. For example, yesterday I was in this situation, but I didn't really know how to express this in English. Could you tell me how to put that in English? Other than that, of course, I was taking classes in English and doing extracurriculars in English. As I already elaborated in this video over here, it's basically going abroad to build and pursue my career. So for me, I want to get my English level in every skill, including reading, writing, speaking, listening, vocab, grammar, everything, to very advanced level, hopefully close to a native speaker in English. This is one of the reasons why I am delving into Western classics in English, The classics are still written in English, but the languages, such as grammar, vocabs, and writing style, they're totally different from what we come across in a self-help book and maybe in a scientific paper too. So by delving into those classics in English, I am hoping to go for more holistic development in English. Anyway, what I was going to say is that studying abroad was definitely required for me to do cultural and language immersion at the same time to reach the level. For my own learning goal. I am not saying that studying abroad is always necessary. You can always work on your language skills in your home country. But just for me, it was necessary, and if you want, I highly recommend it because it makes everything easier. And let's move on to the question of the day. Have you experienced this passive fluency, and what are your ways to tackle this? Please feel free to leave it down in the comment section below to help each other out. Well, this was pretty much everything I wanted to cover in this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you think you got some value out of this video, please hit the like button to support this channel and consider subscribing if you haven't done so. If you're still worried about speaking in front of other people in a foreign language and having a conversation with a native speaker, you might want to check out this video over here where I talk about my own fear and common fear when speaking a foreign language, and I also talk about how to tackle these fears. Thank you so much for watching again, and I hope to see you on the other side, and have a lovely day. Bye bye.